Well, friends, we have a really good show for you today. Scott, take it away.
So this conversation I was having with this kid, because he insisted on chatting with me.
Well, that's good.
About our website,
Yep.
and he decided to record it, and he put it up in 5 parts. I'm having it removed, so there it is there on his website there. But anyway, he keeps commenting, and he keeps using this Ernest P. Worrell is what he was running under.
Oh, yeah, Ernest P. Worrell.
Yeah, he has got this together. If I pull up one of the comments on the stuff, the only people commenting under here, there's the 2 there, and these are the 2 guys, Faze and Cornelius Crewe, have put these guys up to it. Look at he's just saying Bill's not a physicist, nothing, right? And then he's commenting about Taffy. But these are the 2 that put the kid up to it.
I would like to say this. This is a private conversation that was not to go out on YouTube or any other social media platform. This was private. What the problem that we're having here is with the kid is that he should have asked Scott for permission before he put that up. I can't even put a video up on Bart Sabrell without first asking for Bart's permission because there's certain things that he doesn't want up there. And of course, I work with Bart doing videos, and I still can't just go putting things up. Well, this kid doesn't know Scott, and Scott doesn't know this kid. So he should have asked permission first. And that's the reason why that video is being taken down and the rest along with it. He should have asked permission first.
That's only polite. It's standard procedure. What sort of questions was he asking you, Scott?
Just usual stuff about the different missions and things like that. But I could hear that he was being prompted.
Another thing I would like to say about the kid is that we would have no problem talking to him, but first he would have to have his parents' permission, and we would have to see his parents give him permission on Skype. The parent would have to come on and give permission and then let him speak. That's not a problem, but he's not doing that. He's trying to subvert the system, and shame on Crewe and Phase 52012 for trying to pimp this kid out.
Yeah, he was talking to Taffy, and what he thinks the debate is just shooting insults. That's all he does. I was on talking to Taffy on his desktop, and when Crewe called Taffy, I said, "Can you pick that up on your tablet?" So he grabbed it on the tablet. So now I'm sitting listening to them having a conversation. And I made a comment, and I didn't realize that Crewe could hear me, and he goes to Taffy, "Oh, you got backup. Oh, you got this. Oh, you got that." But all he did was hurl insults at him, just calling him a demented old man the whole time. And Taffy asked him a serious question, and it's one he'd asked him before. His only objective is to just cause dissent. He doesn't have any knowledge, because I made a comment, and then when he knew it was me, he asked me about the wet flag. And he says it's nylon. Well, if you're a bloody American citizen, okay, and that's an official American flag, if this man has actually seriously watched our videos and taken anything in, he would know, because we went through in entire detail on the exact materials that this flag is made of, number one. The official size, how it's folded, we did all that stuff. And we went over the details of how this flag is drawing. And he's just going, "Oh, nylon can't get wet. I know all about plastics." That's what he said. And then he starts insulting me. This isn't a man, he wants to come on a debate. He wants us to do the kid or whatever. That's not the purpose of his thing. He just wants to throw insults out, try and discredit us in any way possible. That's his entire objective. That's him and Faze. And they're cowards. To have this guy to be that cowardice that he's going to use a 14-year-old kid. They don't do research. They don't analyze anything. They don't look at anything objectively. We've talked about the educational level of the people in the United States before, and this is just a shining example.
If you guys want to continue this nonsense, go over to Shill Stompers. That's what that channel's for. You can say and do whatever you want over there. Oh, yes, and speaking of faking it all the time and things along that line, The next subject for discussion is going to be Thunderfoot, Phil Mason, and Smarter Every Day, Jason, and how they're calling out Musk, saying that it's going to take up to 20 rockets to make it to the moon. That is the size of Starship with all those engines on it. So let's just take a look at that now.
Smarter Every Day, 11.1 million subscribers. And he puts a video out where he's discussing Musk's rocket technology and everything else. And he does compare it a little bit to Apollo because he's saying that they did it. But when you look at certain details of it, the amount that the rocket that they have was lifting, it had no payload and could not make it to space with those 32 engines on there. It couldn't even get to space. Then they had the smaller one with it. And when they're claiming what the payload ratings were on the thing, Robert and I went through the different payloads for Apollo, anywhere between 45 tons to 140 tons that are now listed for a Saturn V rocket. Did they not claim that they needed to lift 140 tons to get to the moon?
That's what they said.
Well, there's other documents out there that says that a Saturn V rocket could only lift 45 tons, and I believe Smarter Every Day said that as well.
Well, 45 tons was what we're told was sent to the moon.
That's what landed.
Now I'd like to read this. It says, the Saturn V holds the record for the largest payload capacity to low Earth orbit, 311,152 pounds, or 141,136 kilograms, which included unburned propellant needed to send the Apollo command and service module and lunar module to the moon. That's the whole thing, the whole package. Now, if we open this one up over here, it says it could launch about 118,000 kilograms, 130 tons, into Earth orbit. That's about as much weight as 10 school buses. The Saturn V could launch about 43,500 kilograms, that's 50 tons, to the moon. Now, does anyone see a problem with this already? Let's keep going. The three-stage Saturn V was designed to send a fully fueled CSM and LM to the moon. It was 33 feet in diameter and stood 363 feet tall with its 96,800-pound lunar payload. Its capability grew to 103,600 pounds for the later advanced lunar landings. Can anyone see the problem with this? Let's go on. The spacecraft mass of 15,103 kilograms was the total mass of the LM ascent and descent stages, including propellants. That's fuel and oxidizer. The dry mass of the ascent stage was 2,445 kilograms, and it held 2,376 kilograms of propellant. Now, let's have a look at this one. How much did the LEM weigh? This article says 33,000 pounds. The Apollo lunar module had 235 cubic feet, 6.7 cubic meters, of interior space for a crew and 2 astronauts. These battery-powered spacecraft were designed for 75 hours of use on each flight. So now the LEM itself weighs 33,000 pounds. Now that's this one. Let's take a look at another one. LM weight, total LEM fueled, 14,515 kilograms, or 32,000 pounds. The increase would be made possible by reductions of service propulsion system propellant requirements associated with ... Let's take a look at the last one. The tables LM descent stage propellant status and LM ascent stage propellant status show, for example, Apollo 11 having 18,184 pounds of propellant loaded in the descent stage and 5,238 pounds in the ascent stage. The spacecraft mass of 15,103 kilograms was the total mass of the LM ascent and descent stages, including propellants, fuel, and oxidizer. The dry mass of the ascent stage was 2,455 kilograms, and it held 2,376 kilograms of propellant. Every one of those statements are wrong except for the very first one. That is 311,152 pounds. That's the whole shebang. Saturn V rocket LM, descent stage, payload, the whole package. So how much of this are you going to trust?
If it was on Wikipedia, I wouldn't trust it at all.
Oh no, this isn't Wikipedia. This is a Google search. And then when you open up the Google searches, then these different articles come up. These actually are written by different companies.
Yeah, but we went through the PDF files as well.
And then I have the documents here that are stated by NASA right out of the main propulsion quick reference data.
And then, of course, we can go over the descent fuel tanks, because Robert and I went over that. Remember when that mathematician from the British Interplanetary Society wanted to discuss the size of the fuel tanks and the weight? The fuel itself is 9.5 pounds per US gallon. The oxidizer is 5.7 pounds per US gallon. The total weight of the oxidizer and fuel on the descent stage, originally they calculated that they need 25,000 pounds. They dropped it to 21,000 pounds. The official document says 19,500 pounds. And then there's an additional document that said that the fuel and oxidizer weigh 18,000 pounds. Now, the quadrant where the fuel tanks sit in are 4 feet by 4 feet by 5 feet high. Inside of that, there's 6 inches of micrometeor shielding inside of there. So you're dropping each one of those a foot. So the fuel tank sitting in there can only be 4 feet high and 3 feet in diameter. So I went to a web page and I found a place that sells water tanks. So I found a 36-inch water tank. 36 by 121 inches gives you basically 475 gallons of water in the tank. Now, you actually need to get a little more than that. The tank should be over 500 each. You need about 2,200 gallons of fuel to come even close to what they claim they had. So this tank is more than twice the size of the quadrant sitting in there. These tanks need to be 11, 12 feet high. Even a 10-foot tank would give you about 1,800. And if you add the fuel up, you're less than 12,000 pounds, even at that, fitting in there. So the actual tanks that are fitting in that 36 inches wide by 48, you call them 1 cubic meter, and you take that in, you have maybe 200 gallons of fuel in each of those quadrants is what you can put in there, giving you a total of 800 gallons of fuel and oxidizer in there. You need combined well over 2,000 gallons, probably 2,200 gallons if you're looking at it on there. And it still doesn't add up to the weight. If you poured those quadrants and took away the micrometeor, if you just put it, you got 1.5 cubic meters per quadrant. If you filled it with concrete, you're only at 14,000 pounds. If you fill all 4 quadrants in concrete, concrete weighs 22 pounds per gallon. But you've got an oxidizer that only weighs 5.7 pounds per gallon. And the fuel is 9.5 per gallon. So when they're stating that they've got 19,500 pounds of fuel there, you can see how large those tanks actually have to be. The new modern updated versions of them landing on the moon, you see these gigantic tanks that are 10 and 15 feet high and 8 feet across to put in because they need thousands of gallons of fuel. We're looking at a mock-up. And of course, they designed Apollo backwards. First, they built the rocket, and then they said, what we're going to put on the moon has to fit in this little thing at the top. You need to reverse engineer it. You have to say, this is all the equipment on the top, and this is the size of the rocket we got. So it's either you got to design it so it fits on multiple rockets, as Musk is doing, deciding that you're going to have multiple rockets, or you have to build a rocket big enough for the equipment to fit on. So you have to start at the moon and work your way backwards, right? The other thing that Smarter Every Day was talking about is he's talking about the difficulty of docking and refueling vehicles in space when you're putting multiples up. And if they don't know how to do that with today's technology, considering the fact that he's figured out how to land the first stage and everything like that, but if there's such difficulty of trying to catch up to a vehicle that's orbiting and docking with it today, how did Apollo do it? How did they launch off the moon and dock?
They said they did.
But it seems to be an impossible thing to do today. They haven't worked out the technology to do that yet. Space is really confusing when you look at it because they've been doing that for over 20 years.
Jason from Smarter Every Day, he shows right here that it's going to take 15 of those starships to get to the moon. Now, that's
Right.
on the paper that he's showing, and he's presenting this at NASA. He's actually presenting this on a platform in front of all those engineers there. And then you take Phil Mason, Thunderfoot, he's breaking this all apart, showing that it's even worse. And then to make matters even worse is that these two guys have PhDs in their respective fields. They're looking at the Apollo missions. They're looking at Artemis. They're looking at the Saturn V. They're looking at this SLS vehicle. They're looking back at the Saturn V. Then they're looking at Starship. But they're not putting this together and saying, hey, wait a minute. This doesn't make sense. Apollo couldn't have happened the way these guys are saying it, but they don't see it.
I guarantee you they see it. They just can't say it because he gets all of his stuff from NASA.
Those two films, I watched both of them. The Smarter Every Day guy, I've seen that before. It was a very good explanation. I thought he was being quite polite about it, but he was making a very strong point. Now, have you seen that document that he showed? Because that was basically explained how they did it. And he said, look, keep it simple. Deconstruct things, make them as simple as possible. Because looking at the Artemis program now, that is so complex, so unbelievably unnecessarily complex. If Apollo could do the lunar orbit, not the lunar orbit rendezvous, but just the lunar orbit, why do you need a gateway, a completely new piece of kit, to orbit the moon in a very strange orbit, this halo orbit? And the point he made, that if you have an emergency on the lunar surface and you need to get back fast, you've got to wait maybe up to a week before the thing gets into position. That makes no sense whatsoever. Certainly not keeping it simple.
This is why not use hypergolic fuel? Because that lander is going to be sitting there in the sun, and then it's going to go into the shade, then it's going to go back and forth. And if you have turbo pumps, you're going to have a big problem trying to fire those up.
Yeah, and if they don't fire up, you're stuck.
It's the corrosion of the hypergolic fuel that causes the thing to refire. Apollo didn't seem to have that kind of problem.
No, but Apollo didn't have fuel pumps to worry about. But I noticed there was absolutely no mention at all of radiation, of vacuum problems, let alone the heat differential, the 500-degree Fahrenheit heat differential between sunlight and shade. Not night, just shade. There was no mention of any of that. But if you're trying to follow what Apollo did, and that document he mentions, SP287, how Apollo was done, which was written up by all the engineers who worked on the program, and they hadn't read it. They didn't know what they were talking about, these guys. It's absolutely extraordinary. He was quite brave to go in with that approach, but I think it was the right approach to take. And I think you'll find a lot of people agree with him, that if you're going to do something as complex as landing man on the moon, which hasn't happened yet, by the way, no matter what people say, I think we've explained quite a lot of the problems behind it already. But then you might say, well, okay, if they didn't land on the moon, why were they doing all this research? Why were they trying to create vehicles which couldn't work? Good question. Because if the lunar landers didn't have sufficient fuel to do what they were supposed to do, given the weight that they are, if they can't do it, wouldn't somebody have spotted it when they were actually working on it? We're not rocket scientists necessarily, but we're just logical, thinking, fairly intelligent people. If we can spot it, that there's a problem, wouldn't some of these 400,000 people who allegedly worked on Apollo spot it as well? Of course they would, but they wouldn't be allowed to say it. That's the point I took from that video of Smarter Every Day. You can't say certain things if it goes against the group think of the environment in which you're working.
If they want to argue with us about this particular topic, all they have to do, and Robert's going to have the link, it's going to be right there. They can go watch Smarter Every Day, how he's talking about all of these problems and the number of rockets that have to be there. And that's even more than what von Braun did, what he said they needed 11. And of course, that became complicated. And then most of those launches are to refuel. And now we have this docking problem that Smarter Every Day is talking about. They got nice videos on the practicing the docking with the LEM and the CSM.
In low Earth orbit.
Yeah. And I mean, if they detach, they're basically traveling at the same speed. They're already basically lined up. That's completely different than coming off the surface and trying to catch up to the thing.
One of those guys, either it was Phil Mason or it was Jason, one of the two guys said that if you took off from the lunar surface, you have this other ship, the command module, that's spinning around going around the moon at 6,000 miles an hour. He said without some really good computer, you're not going to be able to find it. It's just not going to be there. You can't catch it. How are you going to find it? We're talking about a tiny little pin. And he says without a really good computer, you're not going to find that. How did they do that with a sextant and a Apollo lunar guidance computer that they had to reset every time they put something in there? They had to reset it.
Smarter Every Day showed the model of the computer that was on the LEM with the keypad. You might as well be sitting there with a dollar store pocket calculator, because it's not going to help you out, because it's not attached to anything either.
Which is exactly the point that Xavier Pascal was making about it, that it couldn't do what we're told it did. In the same way that the descent stage couldn't do what we're told it did, because it didn't have the fuel for it. The ascent stage didn't do what we're told it did. They were making these things up because that was the narrative. We're going to land on the moon. This is how we're going to do it. So if you've got a narrative like that, you've got to do what the dead president said, come hell or high water. And we know how they did it now. It was all faked.
Yeah, the Americans had nothing to do with it. They had to import German scientists to figure all this out for them.
But here was the other problem that we were talking about too yesterday. Take a look at the size of the fuel tanks and how many of them there are on that Artemis landing vehicle. And now let's take a look at the ones that were on the Apollo landing vehicle, the LEM. That is a very, very big difference in size and volume and quantity.
As a landing vehicle on the moon, to have a 100-foot high rocket standing on its end, how the hell are you going to do that and make sure it doesn't fall over? Because if it falls over, end of story. Dead astronauts. Why don't they use something similar to the Apollo lander, which was much wider across its feet than it was high? But at least it was going to stay upright when it landed, no matter how much angle there was.
Is it true or not that didn't Musk want to land that Starship in one shot, like right from the Earth
first,
to the moon?
yeah.
Yes, he did.
What? How's that going to work?
Well, that's going back to what von Braun was saying, that you needed 3 rockets to get there.
If Starship is going to be taking off from the Earth, refueling however many times, and then lands on the moon, then what's the need for the gateway then?
There isn't.
Is Starship going to go up to the gateway and refuel? That's not the way that the graphics are showing. They're showing an Artemis-type capsule and vehicle docked to the space station with that descent vehicle on it, which attaches itself to the gateway station. And then that's the vehicle that goes down. Do you see any Starship vehicle anywhere in this schematic docked to the lunar gateway station? No. So what are we talking about here? This is 2 different missions.
Yeah,
That's right. The gateway does 2 things. Number one, they make it go around the moon in a halo compared to the Earth, because it has to orbit around the center of the gravitational pull of the moon. So that's why they're calling it a halo orbit, which it's not really a halo orbit. It's considered halo to the Earth.
That's just orbiting north and south instead of east to west.
What it does is it gives you 100% communication.
Then why is Elon Musk making this Starship that's supposed to make it there, the whole vehicle land in one shot, and now you have a separate space program that's going to send an Artemis-type vehicle on an SLS system that's going to dock to this station and then from there down. So you have 2 separate entities that are working on this problem.
it's not a simple operation.
Right. And then when you dock with a halo orbiting machine, you need a whole lot more extra fuel to get back here. Because now you have to change direction and do your whiplash around the moon again from the other orbit. The purpose of the gateway is for consumables, that they send a bunch of stuff out load that thing full of consumables out there. But every time they do it, if it's in a halo orbit, they have a huge problem to get to be able to lock onto it. But Smarter Every Day is already talking about refueling in low Earth orbit. That's a huge problem. He says, like, just to even connect with that. So if we look at Apollo, their test of the docking and undocking should have been done with another vehicle launched from Earth to catch up to one and dock with it. I'm just baffled at the amount of money that NASA is spending on updating files. I mean, you imagine they probably got a team of guys trying to figure out how to keep that flag wet.
I mean, that's what we're showing. All the different text and all the different changes and all the different fonts. You have pages. Here's the front page. Here's the back page. And it's got two different fonts on it, completely different fonts. Then you look at the top of the page. Okay, there's paragraph 1, 2, 3. Then there's a line. But wait a minute. It's on the same page. Now there's a different font again. And it keeps changing.
Robert and I went through to show some of the updates on the files and showing, including modified what now look to be original documents with the original date on them. Yeah. And you can see where the paragraphs have been altered. Like they'll drop a paragraph in and the font is very close. It's just a whole lot cleaner. But the borders don't line up anymore because they can't do it exactly as what was printed.
Not in this case here. And it was in the LEM. It was this one right here, and it was the best evidence right there. There it is. There's one example. Now watch this. See the difference already?
Yeah, quite different.
It gets better because it shows it on the same page. But look at this. Here we go again. It's changed. What happened there? That's the back of page what? That's 138. That's 139. What's happened here? I mean, look at the fonts. They're not even close.
If you examine it, some of the fonts they're now using weren't available 50 years ago.
They are trying to match them up.
This line here is a totally different font than the rest of this whole document here. Just that one line. Yep. I mean, it doesn't take much to see it.
Different weight of text as well. It's almost like it's slightly bigger. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, you're right. It is bigger.
I mean, that's C, a C of cross in the first line and a C of clusters.
Oh, and take a look at the border. The border on that line, the oak at the start is off to the side. That should be a straight border all the way up.
Yeah, it should be. It's not.
This document's riddled with these examples. And now, guess what? We're back to...
Yeah, different font.
Why would you keep switching fonts? Wow, look at this one now.
Yeah, completely different.
Yeah, well, you can pick up a paragraph pretty quick when the border doesn't line up. We just randomly pulled documents up to look at and just started finding them everywhere. Like that looks like an original. That last page looks like quite the original. It is typed in, and you can see that it's typewritten, and that's a ribbon file using that, and you can see each one that bleeds a little bit through the ribbon when they're hitting the key, and that's either the person typing it hits it harder and does that, but they do it consistently, like on a particular letter.
And when things were copied 50 years ago, we didn't have scanners that we do now. We had photocopiers, and that always slightly bled the typeface compared to a scanner. So there's going to be a difference in appearance, and I think that's what you spotted. So if NASA are now changing their documentation, they can hardly claim that it was a record of what happened back then. It didn't happen. It's the little details that make the difference. And they're not keeping it simple. They're not kissing it, are they? Keep it simple, stupid. So they're probably spending more on documentation than they are on rocket design. Dear, dear. You'd think they'd be more interested in getting into space and finding out what's going on the moon than changing their documents to prove they didn't. Because now they've got to do it for the first time. They've got to do it with everybody watching. NASA is very uncomfortable.
Well, they all applaud.
Of course
they are. That's even in Smarter Every Day. All the videos he puts up, they do one little thing and they all jump up and applaud and the thing blew up. I mean, what the hell?
That's what you're supposed to do if you work at NASA. You applaud. You know, there's 400,000 people applauding because they all did it. Are we clever? No, you're not clever at all, you bunch of numpties. Do it for the first time and do it for real. That's what we're asking you. We know you didn't do it the first time. It's that story about, well, if they faked it the first time, why do they have to do it another 5 times? Because they could. It's that simple. It's that simple. It's that simple. It's that simple.